Yeah, welcome to Diversity as a Data Dimension, how Ancestry Insights drives customer engagement. Guys, I'm so excited to share what we have with you guys today. We are launching the Origins product within the PersonaLive platform. My name is Leiden Faust, and I am the CEO of Spatial, if you haven't met us. And I am joined by a very special guest today, Richard Weber. Welcome, Richard.
And I'm very honored to be joining you.
Good. Richard has some British humility, so he won't tell you this, but he is the creator of the first geodemographic segmentation in the UK. You may know it, Mosaic and Experian. And I'm so excited to be launching this with him today. This is his new product, Origins. But we learned everything that we do about segmentation from Richard and from the books that he has written. So it's really coming full circle. You would not have Spatial in the way that it is today if it were not for Richard. So that's one of the reasons I'm really excited about this. If you haven't heard about us, we're Spatial, and we create a segmentation. We use all the same the methods that Richard were using in the 1970s to create a geodemographic segmentation, but we use a little bit different data sources. So just a real quick background on us. We classify every household in the United States into one of these 80 segments based on three factors. One, social media, what they follow. Two, where the mobile device goes. And then the third is their individual demographic information. And that gives you a real-time segmentation. And it's a great look at the behaviors of folks in the data set. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today, we are talking about the Origins data set and the Origins product. So PersonaLive can give you a really good picture into the behavior of your customer file and the demographics of your customer file. But Origins gives you a deep insight into the ancestry of your customers and their ethnicity. And Richard is going to walk through in a little bit how that impacts our decisions even today. And that will together give you a deep insight into why people do what they do, and ultimately will give you actionable intelligence that you can use to activate in your marketing and your growth campaigns. So I'm going to go through a quick agenda and some housekeeping. At the end of this, we're going to share an offer with you guys. So stick around to the end. You'll see in the right-hand side, there's a little chat button. I want you to be liberal with that chat button and ask questions. It's pretty rare to be able to ask questions of the inventor of the geodemographic segmentation. We know a lot about geodemographic segmentation, so go ahead and ask those questions. I'd love to capture those at the end, and I'll go through the agenda. So we're going to be introducing Origins in part one. I'm going to talk about the best meta ad campaign that I've ever seen. We'll talk about some US demographic trends, and then we are going to launch Origins. And the second part of this will be Origins in action. I'm going to show you this demo on the PersonaLive platform, go through some use cases, and then we'll do an offer and a Q&A. Okay, let's talk about the best meta ad campaign that I have ever seen. So we were working with a car insurance company. And this car insurance company was relatively new to Facebook, but the short of the story is they uploaded their data and they found they had a lot of Hispanics as part of their customer segments. Now, this was not totally surprising to them. They knew this. Their founder was Hispanic, so there's some reason around that. And then they created an ad, and I just made an AI recreation of the ad. This is not the actual ad. I can tell you that this ad, it almost looked like an ad that was made on PowerPoint. So it wasn't the most impressive ad. But what they did is they targeted specifically those segments on Meta. And the results from this campaign were some of the best results that I have ever seen. I'll share some of them here. So what we had to go against was the industry baseline for car insurance ads. So the industry baseline was a 0.56% click-through rate. Means 0.5% people typically click with a $3.77 cost per click. That's what you would expect if you're running an insurance ad. But they made a very specific insurance ad to their specific consumer, primarily Hispanic, that would only resonate with them and only targeted those people. And the results from that were wild. So instead of getting a 0.5% click through rate, they were seeing click through rates of 9% up to 15%. That's almost 2 out of every 10 people clicking on an ad. And they were getting these clicks for pennies, which was absolutely unbelievable when we looked back at that. So, what's going on? Why was this such a powerfully performing campaign? So we see this in the PersonaLive platform because we can see what segments people are targeting. The problem is that everybody is focusing on the top 25% of earners, and they're getting the majority of ad spend. And if you think about social media and programmatic advertising, this is an auction, and everybody is fighting for the top 25%. Whereas we know there's some changing demographics in our country. We are projected by 2043 to be a majority minority country in the United States. I think that is extremely conservative. I think we're going to hit it before 2043. Already today, 1 in 3 Americans are living in a majority minority county. And from this results of this ad campaign, we can see that you can get 10x ROAS by being very specific of the ancestry of the folks that you are targeting. And just to give a little bit of context and put this against a backdrop, this is happening right now, but you can see across the years, and especially recently, the white majority population is dropping very significantly. So I think we all really need to pay attention to ethnicity and ancestry as we're moving forward. And in this webinar, we're going to show you how you can do that with the Origins data set and how you can take action on that. And with that, I will leave it off to Richard to tell you about Origins.
Well, thank you, Lydon. Now, I think that this seminar should be particularly interesting to people in certain sectors of the market. So you've mentioned automotive, and I think there are a lot of people who wouldn't really think that automotive is very well correlated with people's heritage. But I can tell you in London, there's a suburb with the highest proportion of Jewish people, and that's often called Volvo City because Volvos is what they like to drive there. And you can also notice the propensity of people of Indian heritage to like driving Japanese cars, and Arabs to drive Mercedes too. So, in addition to cars, which I think is not the most obvious use, but nonetheless worth considering, and I think you've demonstrated how powerful it can be, the heritage that people come from is particularly relevant to anything to do with food and drink, which we'll see later on. I think it's very relevant to where people travel, particularly foreign travel. The programs that they find entertaining are different very much according to their heritage and the sports that they want to watch on the television or play or even go and watch in person. Telecoms companies are clear users of Origins because they can identify people who want to communicate with people in their home countries. Media is very important, and even savings. So, for example, there are many savings products that are really designed for Muslims. They're Sharia compliant. And I think that in the future, apparel is going to be quite a big application area for segmentations based on people's ethnicity and heritage. Now, up to now, if you wanted to target people on the basis of background, heritage, you probably would have to rely on data aggregated to some form of geography. And although obviously in America there's a huge amount of individual data, people for good reasons aren't particularly keen to give an answer to a question, what is your background or ethnicity? And even if people were to answer that question, probably you would get the wrong answer. In other words, if Lydon Faust was asked what he was, he might say he was American. But if you looked at his name, you might realize that he had German heritage, and many of his behaviors are somewhat similar to people who've come from Germany centuries ago. So I was obviously involved with Experian in the construction of Mosaic, And now what, if we can go to the next slide, we can look at is why we might want to target on the basis of names. So once upon a time, I used to have a tenant called Daniele Cecchimori who lived in my house. And simply by looking at his name, Daniele, which is not Danielle, it's an Italian male name for Daniel, you can see from that bit of his name that he's Italian. And actually, if you wanted to know where he came from in more detail, you could even find out that Cecchimori was a name that was particularly common in the central part of Italy. And there are hardly any ethnic groups other than Italians that are called Cecchimori or that call their boys Daniele. So if we go to the next slide, you can imagine how, if we can build a huge database with the surnames and family names and personal names of as many people as possible, in this case, we've got up to 1,100,000, knowing those names and the countries where those names were recorded is very helpful for enabling us to associate each of now, I think it's 4 million different surnames with a culture. Now, these are not necessarily countries that we define. So, for example, in Italy, there are a lot of people in the north who are of German ancestry. In Romania, there are a lot of Hungarians, and obviously in America, there are lots of people from many, many different countries. So we're not trying to find just where do people live, but we're trying to find what their heritage is as well. So if we go to the next slide, if I may, you can understand how with some clever software, and the originator of that software, I hope, is listening from Munich at the moment, you can see how from our nearly 1 billion names and our 3 to 4 million surnames and 600,000 different personal names, we can then develop some software, which you can see next, which will process as big a file as Leiden's. So in Germany, we managed to process, I think it's 260 million names of Americans. And by taking their first name and their surname and matching them against these two reference files, we can make a pretty reliable forecast both of the background of the first name and of the surname. And if you know both of those, it gives you much more confidence in knowing that you've got the right code for the customer. And obviously, having both hits, you have a much higher chance of getting a category for each customer. So at the moment, I think on your file, Leiden, we've managed to classify over 99% of your names, and we put them at the moment into about 20 categories so as to make sure that we're reasonably accurate. Right, so if we go to the next slide, I can mention that our viewer in Germany, who is of English origin, he's called Weber, just like I am, and he really does entertain his friends because when they come for dinner, he puts a whole chicken on the table, whereas they in Germany are only used to having sliced meat. Now, that's a very peculiar and detailed difference in behavior between Germans and English people. But if you take his cousin, for example, who is of Chinese, Vietnamese origin, she eats rice on her table in England, whilst I would probably prefer a potato. And we've had a lot of arguments in our family as to whether you spice up a meal with condiments or whether you put the spices in the meat before you cook it. And I can tell you that difference of opinion settles very closely with differences in cultural background as well. So that's just a few examples from daily life of how preferences differ from country to country. And it's not just what you eat, but how you prepare, what utensils you use, and also what time of day you eat, what time of the year you go. Do you go out at Chinese New Year or at Christmas? And how many people are there around the dinner table? So we know very well that certain ethnic groups, they like to eat much more on their own. They buy much smaller packs. And other cultures, they like to buy big packs and have large numbers of people around the table. And perhaps finally, I think one of the most important sectors for this sort of differentiation and segmentation is beauty, because clearly all the races in the world have slightly different skins, different hair types, and there's no single beauty product that's really suitable for all of them. So the more the manufacturers of the beauty products can identify the heritage of individual customers, the more likely they are to please them with products that exactly match their needs and physical conditions. So I think I'm going to hand over to you, Lydon, am I not now?
Yeah. Okay. That's great.
For the demo.
Let's talk about how the rubber hits the road here. So within the PersonaLive platform, if you would like to understand your segments and how they map to this, you can go to append, hit new append. And if you've used this before, you can go to customer list. And if you have a customer file that has first name and last name, which I have here, you can just drop that file in here. And then what you can expect from that file is to have each one of those names coded to one of the two levels of the origins codes. And so I'm going to show you, since we don't have any of your customer data, across some of our own data, how this actually plays out here. So I can go to the Explore tab, and typically we have social media accounts here on the right-hand side, so I can look at Jim Beam versus Budweiser, for example, on the PersonaLive segments. But now we can actually dig into this via the Origins groups as well. So if I go over here, I can go down to Origins subgroup, and now I get a sense of who is following Budweiser based on their origins code or their ancestry. So we see they over-index 30% more likely to have a Polish name, for example. And we can do this across a number of brands. So I can go and look at Patron Tequila, for example, here, and I see Mexicans are 53% more likely to follow this brand, followed by African Americans. And then we can look at across this a number of different categories. If we want to look at automotive, for example, and these are two different car manufacturers, pretty much based in a very similar area. But we can see Mercedes-Benz has sort of an Arab, North African, Pakistani, so almost like an Eastern feel to the people that follow that brand, that are interested in that brand. Versus Volkswagen has a lot more of a Northern European feel for the types of people that are following that particular brand. And then Richard talked a little bit about beauty, and we can see that here. So we can go down to Fenty Beauty, which I believe Fenty Beauty is owned by Rihanna, which is a U.S. musician. So we can see Fenty Beauty primarily 3 times as likely to be followed by African Americans, versus if we go down to Urban Decay, for example, highly likely to be followed by people of Mexican ancestry. So you can see here, there's a lot of understanding that you can get when you look at your own customer file and get a ranking, not only by who is your best customers, but also by which product lines those customers are buying as well. Great. So let's walk through here a few other use cases, and we're just going to hit them right on the nose for once you have this Origins customer data, what can you do with it? Richard, you want to walk through a few?
Well, I'm going to walk through 3 very, very quickly, because we've mentioned the Chinese New Year. And when I've been in Asia, I'm amazed how important that is to the Chinese. And when you think about the amount of marketing effort that goes into trying to persuade Europeans to go shopping at Christmas, it makes you wonder why tools such as this aren't used by people selling products to the Chinese, particularly things relating to food. And I would have thought that is a complete no-brainer to use targeting at different times of the year for different people according to their background. Now, the second is an example that might seem a bit obscure to you, but there was not very long ago in Britain a by-election for Parliament in a town which had a very large number of people who had once come from Glasgow in Scotland, where there were many steelworks that had shut, and they all moved to Corby in Northamptonshire. Now, I don't know whether you've spoken to people in Glasgow, but it's very difficult to understand what they say. And likewise for Glaswegians, it's very difficult to understand what people like me are saying. So what the political party decided to do was to go through all the electors in Corby constituency and use Origins to mark up which ones were of Scottish origin. They then got their call centre in Glasgow that was used to speaking to Glaswegians to ring these people in the Midlands of England in their proper Glaswegian accents. And I think this was the first time that any electors in Corby had actually understood properly the proposition of the party that was telemarketing to them. And I can tell you that that party, somewhat surprisingly, did manage to win this by-election. Now, the third one that I think is really very obvious in Britain, but we have flights across the North Sea or the English Channel to probably about 40 other European countries. And hitherto, I don't think any of the airlines that have promoted a new route have been able to target people from the nationalities or ethnicities of where the route was going to. So they often have used where are the most Poles in England and target on a postcode basis. But now if they're opening a new route to Belgrade, they can actually go and find people with Serbian names. And this, to me, is a huge improvement on what we've been able to do before, and clearly impossible with any other demographic piece of data. So those are my three suggestions to you.
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, you could probably functionally be thinking in your business, how can you take those same concepts and apply it to your brand? I'll walk through three that I like. So another thing that you can do is fine tune your in-store product assortment. If you're a grocer, for example, and you have a list of names, you might find that there's particular ethnicities that you might not know are a big part of going to your store, and make sure that the things that they resonate with are in there. If you are a D2C brand or an e-commerce brand, you don't have to do this just at the sale level. You can actually do this at the product level, and you might see that there are some particular products that people of certain ancestry will buy. We work with a number of outdoors companies, and we might see that their fishing line for some reason is bought by someone with particular ancestry. When you're marketing a product to those people via your email campaigns, you can use that as part of a consideration. Another is enhancing customer service. This isn't far off from the use case that Richard was talking about when he was talking about the pollsters. But imagine you had a first and last name and a support ticket for your company. You can see that first and last name indexes towards being Portuguese. What if we route that to a Portuguese speaker within your own company? That can be a really, really good customer service move. And then finally, media placements in niche channels. So you might be considering where you're spending your marketing dollars. And if you find that you have a particular ancestry or origins group, you might want to consider channels like BET, like Telemundo, for example. I know Telemundo is significantly cheaper than mainstream media, but these might be more targeted for you. And you can do just what we saw at the beginning that automotive insurance company did for their automotive ads. Okay. So thank you for everyone who stuck here to the end. Here is the offer. So your first 1,000 records, and Richard was very kind to be able to do this. We can code your first 1,000 records for free. All you have to do is email Leiden@Spatial.ai and put in the subject origins. So if you're interested in getting your first 1,000 records coded for free, email Leiden@Spatial.ai and put in origins. I'd love to do some Q&A. I see a number of questions here in the chat, so I'll read these off. We'll see if they're either for me or Richard, and we can get at them. And as we're asking, you can put some more questions in the chat here. So I got one question here. Can I get this if I am not a PersonaLive customer? That's a really good question. Right now, you have to be a PersonaLive customer to get this in the platform. We do plan on having enrichment service in the future, but maybe this is a question for Richard. If they're interested, could they go straight to the Origins website, Richard, and get this?
Well, they can't go straight to the website, but they can go straight to you. And it's not at all difficult to code files, even if they're not in Persona.
Cool. Rock and roll. All right.
They just need to ask you, and you need to talk to me, and we'll fix you up pretty quickly. It doesn't take very long to get that sort of job processed.
You're just talking to me and Richard here, so we can make it happen. Okay. Another question. This might be a Richard one. What happens when someone is married and they take on another name, or what happens to hyphenated names?
Right. Well, with the hyphenated names, we take the second section after the dash or the space. When people get married, clearly it's a bit of a problem, but I think people can exaggerate how big the problem is because most people we find are actually married or have partners with people who are in the same origins category as they are. Now, say they don't, you then have the question, what are you trying to categorize? Do you want to categorize the head of household, the decision maker, the person who does the grocery shopping or whatever? So you will find in any household that there could often be more than one origins category. But mostly people do either get married to people in the same category or get married to somebody in a relatively similar category. So you need to bear this in mind, but I think if you use origins in combination with gender, you should avoid any serious pitfalls here.
Hmm. Yep, that's excellent. Um, then we got a similar question here from Bailey. How do you address married customers who no longer go by their maiden name? I think you already got that. I've got another question here. Does geography play any part in the classification of the names?
Right, well, that's a very interesting question at the moment for us because in the States you have such a large proportion of your population as Hispanic, and we didn't really want to categorize all of them as just being Hispanic. So what we have done is to overlay with those names that we would otherwise simply call Hispanic. We've overlaid them by census geography. And for each zip code in the States, we know which is the Hispanic category, which is most highly represented there. So consequently, on your demo, I think, Leiden, we could see a few people who were Peruvian or Mexican or from Haiti or from Honduras. So people get those classifications where, first of all, their name indicates they're Hispanic, and secondly, their zip code indicates that that is the Latin category, which is most common in that particular zip code. I hope
Okay.
that answers the question.
Yeah, hopefully it does. Yeah. I got another here. Does PersonaLive tell us which channels each origin class follows? We do have a list of channels, and you can actually you can look at it by origin class, but you can look at it by segment, and we can relate those origins to the segments. You can get a list of channels. So it's not a direct, but you can get a sense of like the Hispanic channels, the primarily African American channels. We got some Middle Eastern channels. So the quick answer to that is if you're using PersonaLive, yes, you can get that. Okay. Any other questions in the chat? I don't think so. Very good. Well, hey, everyone. Thank you for sticking on this webinar to the end. We've loved having you. I am so excited for releasing Origins within PersonaLive. I think it's going to give us a deeper dimension of understanding people. Richard, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you too for hosting this.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.